this episode, I'm covering the 2007 movie Zodiac. This feels more like it's going to be an update to a previous episode on The Digressor, because in 2020, my 13th episode of The Digressor, I covered the Zodiac Killer, but I was never really happy with the way it turned out, because I basically just read the Wikipedia article, literally, and yeah. So, I bought this movie on Blu-ray. There was a special 2-disc director's cut. It's the copy that has, like, the case looks like the letter to the editor. And yeah, I bought it a few months ago with the sole purpose of reviewing it for Halloween. So, I've been thinking of this episode for a while. I'm showing the microphone my phone. Look at all the notes I have. So this is the most research I've put into an episode of Casablanca. Hopefully it'll go better than the last time. That was my early days of podcasting. I was basically just reading Wikipedia articles. So I like to think I've come a long way since then. Or actually do more research than just, I'm going to read the Wikipedia article. So anyway, yeah, Zodiac is a 2007 thriller film directed by David Fincher, starring Jake Gyllenhaal, Mark Ruffalo, and Robert Downey Jr. So basically, the three main actors in this later went on to be in the MCU. So it's basically, this film stars Mysterio, Bruce Banner, and Tony Stark. Now all they need is to have John Carroll Lynch play a character in the MCU, and you've got the movie. This Zodiac is the movie where Mysterio, Bruce Banner, and Tony Stark go after, assuming that they have him play a villain. They should have John Carroll Lynch play a villain, just so that you can have this be a thing that people probably won't say. I'll say it. It was based on Zodiac by Robert Graysmith, who this book, it's literally, I mean, he wrote two books about Zodiac that I know of, and I own them both. And I think I'm pretty sure it's happened before, but I was thinking of saying, this is the first time I've seen a movie about a book about the creation of itself. But, no, I'm pretty sure that's happened before. And since, isn't the newer Little Women about that? One with Emma Watson? But yeah, this movie, I've seen a bunch of movies based on the Zodiac Killer, and this is by far the best. Because the other ones, like, they try to turn into, like, a slasher film, or, like, a horror film. And I've seen other ones where, like, they add to the story where, like, it reveals the identity, and he, like, adds to his body count, and they, like, fictionalizes it or sensationalizes it. Even the ones I've seen that try to tell the actual story basically just sensationalize it. This is the only one I've seen that's why I said, it's not a horror film. They try to be a horror film in the other ones. This one is a thriller. It's more of a crime drama, kind of like a detective story, because it shows the killings, and it only shows graphic content when it needs to. I think the most graphic part is when Paul Stein gets shot, and even that's just for like one shot. No pun intended. And yeah, like all the attacks take place in like the first I was gonna say first half hour, but more like the first. I won't say half hour, but I think it's more than that. First 45-ish minutes, give or take a few hours. This is a very long movie. Yeah, it's over 2.5 hours long, and yeah, so it would make sense to say that all the attacks are in the first, I would say, 45 minutes. And something that's really cool about this, like the film, it opens not with the words "based on a true story." It says based on actual crime file or whatever it says. It says something like that. And the reason they said that is because you notice they skip the first murder. Well, that's because they only showed the ones that had witnesses. If there's no witness to the crime, they don't put it in the movie because they don't know what happened. Like, specifically, like, what happened. See, the film opens with the murder of, like, Darlene and Mike Majow. Majow? I've heard it pronounced like 3 different ways. Anyway, film opens with that, and they're the second murder. Well, she is. He survived. And the reason it starts with the second is because no one survived the first one. There was no witnesses, and it's based on the crime files. And so if they were to adapt that, like try to recreate that, what happened, they would just be making it up. Because they have no idea what happened. Even within there is a Zodiac community. Even within the Zodiac community, there's debate on what exactly happened. And then it shows the murder of Cecilia Shepard, or the attack on her and Brian Hartnell at Lake Berryessa. And since he survived, they are able to know what was said. And that's what I mean. Like, they don't know, like, did the Zodiac just come up, shoot them, and leave? We don't know. But with Lake Berryessa, there was a whole conversation, a back and forth. And we know that because Brian Hartnell survived. So, you're probably wondering, why did they show Paul Stein's murder? Because he didn't survive. There were no survivors in that. But there were witnesses. The kids across the street, they know what happened because the kids were able to describe what he was doing. Like they thought he was wiping stuff in the car, but now it's believed that he was ripping Paul Stein's shirt. So there was witness to that. So I keep saying so. There was witnesses to that, meaning they're able to show it in the movie. Now, something they put in the movie that I'm still surprised they put this in. The more I learn about this case, the more because I love this movie. I've seen it like 100 times. I technically didn't even need to watch it this time. I've seen it so many times. I could have just like started recording like, hey, I remember this movie like word for word. But I wanted, it's an excuse to watch the movie again. So I am always surprised. The more I learn about this case, the more surprised I am they even put it in the movie. Kathleen Johns, when she was abducted on the highway, or I think it was a highway. Anyway, like, she got pulled over by somebody because she got flagged down by somebody who said, "Hey, not to alarm you, but your tire's loose and I want to straighten it." She's like, "Oh, okay," but then like he just loosened the tire actually, so that when she started driving, the tire fell off, and he was like, "Oh, I guess it was worse than I thought. I'll give you a ride." And when she gets in the car, he's like, "I'm gonna kill you and your baby." And it doesn't show it in the movie, but she jumps from the car. Like, after a while, she realizes that he's gonna kill her, and he wasn't gonna stop because they're on like the highway in the middle of nowhere. There's no stop signs, no street lights, so she just like tucked her baby close to her, and like basically tuck and rolled, and then she ran into the field, and the the person stopped and was like going to get out, but then like the truck driver you see in the movie, like he pulls up and then the guy drives off. So yeah, it doesn't it like her story ends right there. But the truck driver takes her and her baby to a police station, and while she's sitting there getting I was gonna say getting questioned, she's like giving a statement, hey, this is what happened. She sees a sketch of the Zodiac on the wall, and she's like, that's the guy that picked me up. That's why it's tied to this case. And the reason I say the more the more I learn about this case, the more I'm surprised they included it, is because even in the Zodiac community, I stopped following the Zodiac community because it's kind of like the Star Wars community. Because they say no one hates Star Wars more than Star Wars fans. I just isn't the same thing. I know that true crime, but they are some of the most, I want to say, like, angry, bitter people. Like, they will fight over every single thing. Their theory is the right one, and you're wrong because you think differently from them. And some of the people who have been studying this case for a long time and think they know everything say that she made it up. She was never abducted. It never happened. And well, for starters, there's like the evidence there. Like her car was set on fire. Like when he realized that, she got away, he went back and burned her car. I was going to say burned her car alive. And yeah. So there's some people that say like she made the whole thing up, it never happened, and then others say, oh, it wasn't Zodiac. He just claimed responsibility for it, but he didn't actually. She's the one that pointed him out. So I like to believe that it was Zodiac. Otherwise, there's just another random person out there picking up random people. And so, like, I was for this episode doing some research. I was trying to find out information on her. Like, I've occasionally tried to look stuff up on her. Like, how is she doing? What is she doing now? Is she even still alive? And you can't find anything about her, which makes sense. Like, she's probably not going to go on like media tours. But I'm assuming because this was 1970, she probably isn't alive now, unfortunately. But you can't find anything because whenever you look her up, all you see are, I was going to say the fans, the Zodiac community fighting over whether or not she's even telling the truth or not. And I was like, just stop fighting. And the reason I think it's so important to not be set in your opinions, especially when it comes to this is an unsolved case. So nobody really knows anything. As in, we don't know who the Zodiac Killer is. We don't know anything like that. So if you have a theory, it may be right, it may not be right. It's important to come into this with an open mind. And if you see something that challenges your theory, change something, not just, oh, somebody says that it probably didn't happen. Okay, I'm going to completely rewrite my theory. No, if you see like actual evidence that backs up another theory, don't just say, oh, well, that can't be right because I think something else. I see that all the time. And the reason I say that is I just watched a documentary last week, and while it didn't completely change my mind, because I don't entirely agree with the documentary, it did make me think of stuff. It was called The Myth of the Zodiac. Basically, the premise of it was this guy was saying that Thomas Henry Horan, he was saying that there's no evidence that the Zodiac Killer even exists, is that it was all of those murders were unrelated, and the person calling themselves the Zodiac Killer was just seeing this information in the paper and writing. But the reason I don't quite buy that is at least the original letters. No, the original letters had details. Like, I'm going to give details that only the police and I know. And then he did it. It's like, how can somebody just, like, oh, there people as a couple murdered on Lover's Lane. I'm going to make stuff up. The brand of the bullet was Super X. That's a random thing to get right. I put the flashlight on the end of a barrel. That's a lucky guess. I don't buy that so much. But there was things about the case that I never heard before. That remember how I said that nobody knows what happened at Lake Herman Road, the first murder? Supposedly, some of the evidence points to there being 2 shooters. And in the documentary, they actually go there and to the actual location, Lake Herman Road, where the murder took place. And, like, I had noticed before, like, the pictures, they put a possible warning shot into the back window. But then there's another bullet at the top of the car, like near the roof, between the window and roof. So they 2 warning shots, like 3 feet apart. I don't know, like, I always thought it was weird, but not that I really thought about it. I'm just like, oh, they shot there and then they shot there. That's kind of a wide spread. But what they're saying here in this documentary is that one person fired the warning shot into the back of the car, and then a second person got out and from like the passenger side of the car, shot over their car and shot the roof of the car, which I guess makes sense because you fire the 2 shots. By the time you get the second one, you've definitely alerted the people in the car, and they're likely going to run, which we do know one of them did run, and they got shot 6 times. So, but yeah, like, he had some good points, and it makes you rethink the case, but in the end, I'm not fully convinced that he's completely accurate. In fact, some of his claims are immediately contradicted by detectives and experts. Like, there were times the guy that made the movie, the documentary, his name is Andrew Nook. Here's a raccoon. So, Tanuki. Tom Nook is not a raccoon. Everyone says raccoon, he's a Tanuki. But anyway, it's in the name. Tanuki. Tom Nook. Anyway, this is not an Animal Crossing episode. I think that he even says at one point in the documentary, I believe, that he's not entirely convinced. But I think he's trying to show doubt in Thomas Horan, because it would show him saying something and then immediately cut to a detective saying something completely different. Or even acknowledging the claim directly, going, oh, he says this, that's not true. We'd have no evidence of that. Like, he's making that up. And yeah, I think there was even a person that was like, I wouldn't take a single thing that Thomas Heron says as truth. He makes stuff up. Which, he possibly does. But there were times in the documentary that I did learn things. Like, there was a witness to the Lake Berryessa murder besides Brian Hartnell. Technically, I mean, she didn't actually witness the murder itself, but she and her friends were at Lake Berryessa that day, and they saw the Zodiac Killer, like, in costume, like, just, like, staring at them from behind the trees, and she's always been afraid to speak up until now. So, that was kind of cool. And he also talked to some of Darlene Ferrin's family, like her sister, her ex-husband, and her previous husband, and like a few other people that I hadn't even considered would even still be alive or think about. Because, like, sometimes you get so deep into these cases, sometimes you forget, oh, these are real people. They have actual lives. And then they see something like this, like a full documentary that digs further into their lives, and you're like, oh, here's her sister, and she gets emotional talking about her sister who was murdered by the Zodiac Killer over 50 years ago, and you're like, oh, right, they were real people. It's not that, oh, I forgot she was real. It's just, yeah, at some point, you study these cases so much, they just become characters in a story, which leads me to the next thing I was thinking of. Oh, wait, I'm skipping a section. I just skipped a whole section of notes. Okay. Wait, what? Okay. Actually, I just have one thing. This is the Zodiac speaking documentary. It's on the Blu-ray, and I think it's on YouTube. It's the one that shows, like, they interview, like, everyone still alive at the time that was involved with the case. All the detectives and all that. And even both survivors, like Mike Majau and Brian Hartnell. The only two people I know, they don't talk to Dave Toschi or Robert Graysmith, and I don't know. They probably reached out and they didn't want to talk about it. I don't know if they. I don't know why Robert Graysmith wouldn't have wanted to talk about it. It's literally based on his book. I'm sure there's reasons they weren't in there, but anyway. I only had one note about that documentary, because it's a really good one, and you really get the full story from, like, the people who were there. But my only note is Mike Majau should not have spoken. And I know that probably sounds harsh, but he is not exactly all there. He clearly has some issues, which is not to put him down. He's been through a lot. But I don't think his story matches with what he told them before. His story changes while he's telling the story, because now he's saying, oh, we were chased all night. He's chasing us. Like, we're definitely being chased down. And it's like, where was that before? Like, you didn't say that before. You didn't tell the cops that. And yeah, like, he kept saying, like, he kept repeating, like, I think she was murdered because she's dead, and then she's dead and she was killed and she was murdered. It's like, yep, we're well aware of that. That's why you're here. And because, like, I understand some people, he's been through a lot of trauma, and that's why I think, like, he probably shouldn't have spoken. Like, okay, maybe he, said a few things. They left everything in. At least, I don't know if they cut anything, but, like, if that's what they left in, I wonder what they cut, if they cut anything, because at some point in his section, like, he's just talking for like 5 minutes and he's barely making sense. And he's like raising and lowering his arms while he's talking. And I'm just like feeling sorry for him, because it's like, he's clearly traumatized and it really messed with him. It's as it would anybody. And I don't think they should have given him as much airtime. Not to say anything bad about him. It's just, it kind of felt exploitive on the filmmaker's part. Basically, it's like, oh, we got the survivor here. People are going to want to hear from him. Yes, we want to hear his side of the story. Well, we want to hear him talk. But there's a limit to that at some point. It's like, turn the camera off. Cut the irrelevant parts. Meanwhile, on the other side of that, you get Brian Hartnell, who he's like very intelligent and like very well spoken, put together. And I want him to read an audiobook or something. I want him to write a book. It doesn't even have to be about Zodiac. Just like his way of thinking and the way he puts things together and the way he thinks and speaks is just, I could listen to him speak all day. And there's probably videos of him talking somewhere, because it turns out he's a lawyer. I looked him up. He is a lawyer. You could hire him. And he actually makes a cameo appearance in the movie. There is a scene when Toski and his partner are in the courthouse, and they're on the stairs, and Toski's like, I really wanted it to be him, talking about Arthur Lee Allen. wrong historical event. And behind them, you see a guy walking with somebody, and that guy is Brian Hartnell. And they're in the court. You know what'd be funny? And I doubt this is what happened, but since he's a lawyer and they're shooting in a courthouse, like, what if he just happened to be there? And it's like, look, they're looking at the dailies at the end of the day, like, oh, we got Brian Hartnell in the back. What luck. That would be kind of funny, but I doubt that's what happened. It was definitely planned. What I think they should have done is I knew there was a cameo is a walk-on cameo with Brian Hartnell. They should have had them both in there, and it would have been perfect. Maybe like have them both sitting down on a bench or something, and just like either in the background or something. Just, I don't know if Mike Majal didn't even want anything to do with it, because I know for the longest time he had like a very private life, and he didn't really give interviews much, and so honestly, I'm kind of surprised he did the documentary, but I'm glad he did. Oh, there's another character in this movie that I wanted to talk about. I almost forgot. I scrolled down and I was like, oh yeah, I skipped another. There's two sections I skipped. One was about the Zodiac. It wasn't really a section. It was literally Michael shouldn't have spoken. That's all I wrote. Bob Vaughn. He is a character in the movie and a real person. He was an organist. He played basically like art houses that were still playing silent films, and he was like an organist playing the show. And his scene was one of the creepiest. And he was the one. Is played by Charles Fletcher. It's the one where that scene where he's like, Mr. Graysmith, I drew all of those posters myself. Let's go in my basement and see when we play. Yeah, that guy, Bob Vaughn, that was his name. He was a real person, and the movie doesn't really explain who he is. They didn't say who's an organist. At least I don't think it does. I've seen this movie 100 times, and I've never noticed that until now, and I only know that because I looked him up. I wanted to see if this really happened and who this was. They just throw it in for the creepy factor, and that's when I found his obituary. He passed away in 2002 before the movie came out, which I think feels wrong because in the movie they kind of heavily imply he was the Zodiac, and he had already passed away by the time the movie came out, so it's like, hey, this dead guy was the Zodiac. But then I saw another post, and it kind of makes sense. Something I never really considered, because like the scene happens, it heavily implies that this guy's the Zodiac, and then you never hear from him again. But then I see this post. Somebody asked on Reddit what happened to, what's the story on this guy, and somebody commented, and I feel bad. I didn't get the username. I just copied and pasted. So somebody on Reddit responded with this. I guess Fincher wanted to show that this obsession was becoming unhealthy. He pretty much lost his family over this. He was becoming paranoid. One could even argue that from Bob Vaughn's perspective, the scene was just two guys talking, and all this eerie atmosphere was in Graysmith's head. I had never considered that. It was basically what they're saying is the scene was just showing that to him, everyone was Zodiac, and he was like finding links everywhere, and like everything was creepy. Everything was, the Zodiac was everywhere. That meme with Chris Pratt where like he has like the board behind him like connected. Yeah, that's basically him in that moment. Where like everything is Zodiac. Zodiac is everywhere. And yeah, like now that I know that, or like have that idea. Like, that scene makes a lot more sense. That's why he's never brought up again, because he wasn't Zodiac. He was never, like, the real Bob Vaughn, I was going to say Vance, Bob Vaughn was never implicated as a Zodiac. In fact, if you go to his, if you do a search for Bob Vaughn Zodiac, his name is Robert Vaughn, actually, technically, the only results you'll ever see is for this movie. And so, like, what they did was actually kind of cool, is they took a real person, and I say it's cool now that I know what the whole purpose of that scene was. They took a real person and used it to show how down that rabbit hole Robert Graysmith was, because that's what people like to say, that the book Zodiac was basically a tale of someone getting obsessed with something, which is true. Like, I've listened to the audio. Okay, so when I say I read a book and then I say I listened to the audiobook, like, it's not the same thing. You never read it. Yeah, I don't read physical books anymore. I buy physical books and I collect them, but I don't read them. I probably should. But anyway, I've listened to the audiobook through twice, and the second one, the Zodiac Unmasked, that one, that's more of like a miscellaneous thing. I've read both, Audible, and I like them both. Zodiac Unmasked basically was, if you read the first one, you've read the second one, because he just goes, it's actually a longer book, and he goes over the same stuff, basically, and he tries to point everything at Arthur Lee Allen. I keep trying to say Lee Harvey Oswald. Very different case altogether. Remember earlier when I said, oh yeah, these people sometimes feel like characters in a story, and they're not real people. That kind of contradicts what I am about to say. I've had this idea for a while. A Zodiac TV show. And I think that this would every time I hear the stories and everything, the more I think this would actually be a really good idea. Because we don't know who Zodiac is. You know, everyone was getting so upset about the Jeffrey Dahmer TV show. I watched it, and everyone's like, "Oh, you're just glorifying Jeffrey Dahmer." But like, every time there was an episode focused on like a victim, they would focus on the victim. They would tell the victim's story, and it made it very clear that Jeffrey Dahmer was a monster. I mean, the show was literally called Monster. However, because we don't know who Zodiac is, if they make a show about Zodiac, it would have to focus on the victims. And something that I've realized in all this, like all the podcasts I've listened to, the documentaries, especially with the myth of the Zodiac, we know a lot about the victims. Like, they had lives. We have, like, some of their friends have given interviews, written books. Some of them are still alive, and it's like her sister, Darlene's sister, said in the documentary, "No one's ever reached out to me. I've been waiting to tell my story." There's probably a bunch of people out there waiting to tell their story. So my thoughts on this is, like really flesh out the story, like, so that people really get to know them. So, like, we know so much about even like the days leading up to them being murdered on Lake Herman Road. David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. Apparently, like, from what everything I've seen, like, the days and weeks leading up to their murders, they're pretty much mapped out. Like, everyone knows it. Like, I mean, not everyone, but like, it is known. If you want to know what their life was like and what they were up to, it's there. People have told their stories. And so, what you could do is do, like, the first episode would tell their story, like the days leading up to the murder, and the episode would end, the first episode would end with their murder on Lake Herman Road. and then the second episode would tell the story of Mike Michelle and Darlene Ferrin, because they have fleshed out stories that have been told. She worked at this diner. Everyone knew who she was. She was married, but she was dating Mike on the side, and they knew, like, he knew, but it was okay with it. There was whatever. And there's a whole story there. That could be a whole episode, and it ends with her murder and him surviving. And then, like, the next 2 episodes could be, like, the police trying to investigate. And then, like, the end of the 4th episode would be them getting the letter. Or maybe the 3rd episode. I don't know. And then the 5th episode would be, like, Lake Berryessa, Brian Hartnell, Cecilia Shepard. And, like, tell their story. Because they were dating at one point. They weren't dating at the time that this was happening. They were just friends. They were trying to go to San Francisco. But they got sidetracked. They went to, like, a thrift store or something. And then they were like, well, we're not going to make it to the city. Let's just go to the lake. And so they were hanging out there. And that's when that happened. And so, like, you could tell the victim's story like this. Like, really flesh it out. And if they include the Kathleen Johns case, they could also include all the other suspected Zodiac things. Maybe even do a flashback to Riverside. Because, speaking of that, like, so I know the official stance is Zodiac only has 5 confirmed kills. And then he made it up. He made the rest up. Like, oh yeah, I took that lady and her baby for a ride. Like, you literally just said what was in the paper. However, he did say that he was going to stop announcing his murders. That's not to say that, like, he really did. I don't even know. Either way, that's what I'm saying. Like, if you're set in your theory and you don't change your mind, then I don't think that's healthy. I don't know if he stopped or not. My theory, I do have a theory though, because the last confirmed kill was Paul Stine, and after he walked up Cherry. I've walked it. I have. Because I live in San Francisco, and I've been to the corner of Washington and Cherry, and I was, like, standing in the spot where Paul Stine's cab was, and then I took the same path that Zodiac was known to have walked. I walked up Cherry, and then we get to it was during the day, so I can't say, oh, at night, this one's the dark, I go the dark way. No, I went during the day, and even if I went at night, like, the area's changed so much in the last 50 years, I doubt it'd even look the same. While he was walking up Cherry, that's when those 2 police officers saw him. And he was almost caught. The only reason he wasn't caught is because somebody put out over the radio, oh, we're looking for an African American. And he wasn't. So they kept going. Had they actually, had the right description over the radio, they're looking for a white guy. This guy's white, walking from the direction of the shooting, and then they stop him, and oh, he's covered in blood. They would have caught them right there. I think he realized that. My theory is that he stopped right then. He got scared, and then, but he wanted to still spread terror, so he just started. That's whenever he started. Oh, I'm going to place a bomb somewhere, and all this other stuff. And then, so he still wrote letters, but he didn't kill anybody. That's my theory. But it's also possible that he did do all the murders that he said he did. Because he said, like, oh, I've killed 12 people, I've killed 20 people, I've killed a whole bunch of people. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, I don't know. And it kind of gets on my nerves whenever, like, I'm on, like, the Zodiac subreddit, and people are like, oh yeah, we know for a fact that he did this and he didn't do that, and that this and that. And they do kind of talk about that somewhat in the movie, where they get so set on, like, the handwriting. Like, you can change your handwriting. I've never written the same thing the same way twice. Like, I don't understand. I understand, like, like, you can recognize someone's handwriting. Like, someone will have like a certain style, but yeah, like if I wrote something and I wanted to write it exactly like that, like the exact same way I write my Q's or P's or whatever, I'd have to like study that and like try to like trace what I wrote, because I've never written, because I've kind of looked through like different things. When I got into the Zodiac killing and I saw that they were ruling people out based on handwriting samples, and the handwriting doesn't match, and I saw this movie and they were like literally going side by side, like, oh, the Q doesn't match, the K doesn't match, or whatever they said. There's similarities in the R's. I took out, because I had some of my handwriting, and I took them out. I looked them side by side. I'm like, I would get rolled out of writing this other thing because my handwriting doesn't match my own handwriting, and I wasn't trying. So, and this guy, I think he knew that they could match a handwriting sample, or try to. So you could do whatever. Like, he writes slowly, you write very slowly, and then like very careful, calculated writing of the letters. So then whenever they're like, okay, we need you to write this out, and then they like write their normal speed, and like, oh, nope, doesn't match. But they've ruled people out based on that, and with the partial print in Paul Stein's cab, which they address in the movie that might not even be his. They could be anybody's, like a cop or somebody, a bystander, like reaching in, and like the partial print was in the blood. But that doesn't mean that the Zodiac's the one that left it. But they ruled people out based on the partial print and the handwriting sample. They were so set on that being the way they were going to solve this that they ruled out other people because they didn't. It's like, oh well, the evidence doesn't match. What's the evidence? This thing we determined to be the only factor. So, yeah, that's law enforcement getting set in their theories. And I think it's important when you're looking at cases, especially ones like this that are unsolved and you don't really know anything about, to go in with an open mind so that if something challenges your theory, don't just outright dismiss it. Because that can't be, because we know this. No, you don't. There is something funny that I thought about this movie that when I tell other people, they're like, how is that funny? Okay, so as you probably know, or don't know, I don't know, the movie Dirty Harry, it was the Clint Eastwood movie. I know what you're thinking, that I shoot 5 shots or 6. You feel lucky. So Clint Eastwood's in that movie, and he plays Dirty Harry. Dirty Harry was directly inspired by Dave Toschi. In fact, in the movie, like the Scorpio Killer, was very clearly inspired by Zodiac Killer, and Dirty Harry was inspired by Dave Toschi. And there's a scene in the movie that shows him watching the movie in theaters. And the reason that's funny is because Dave Toschi was a consultant for the movie. So there's a scene with the real Dave Toschi watching Mark Ruffalo playing him, watching Clint Eastwood playing a character of him. So that's like a whole Inception level of layers there. And I always thought that was kind of funny. Yeah, I think I'm going to end the episode here. This is probably my longest episode I've ever done for a single movie that wasn't a 10th episode. So I'm not covering 2 movies, so have like twice the time. That's how much I like this movie. Is I could easily talk almost an hour about it. But I'm going to end the episode here. Goodbye.